Record. Okay. We're going to start endocrine glands today. We're absolutely not going to get through all of them. We'll have to finish it off next week because we don't have class tomorrow. Remember that endocrine glands secrete hormones that are deposited directly into the bloodstream versus exocrine glands, which secrete non-hormonal substances, but they secrete them into ducts. So that's the big difference between exocrine and endocrine glands. Endocrine glands secrete hormones. So here is an overall diagram of the endocrine glands for the human body. You can see that they are located throughout the body. And depending on the endocrine gland, you're going to have different hormones that are going to control different processes. The main endocrine gland is the pituitary gland. And you can see from the diagram down here that the pituitary has both an anterior, which means towards the front or the top, and posterior, which means towards the back or the end. The pituitary is going to secrete hormones that affect other glands and organs. So this is why it gets a bit complicated. Also, you can see this is a cross section of the brain, which we studied already. This is the cerebrum. The corpus callosum is here. That is what connects the right and left hemispheres. You have the diencephalon here. That's the upper brain stem. That's where you have the hypothalamus and the thalamus behind it. And then you've got the lower brain stem, which is here. So you have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And this is the cerebellum back here, just to review that. And your pituitary is right there. Okay, a little tiny, looks like a little pea hanging from there. Now, what you can see from the diagram here is that you have these neurons that stem from the hypothalamus here all the way down into the posterior pituitary. And you don't have the same thing for the anterior pituitary. That's going to be important when I talk about that specifically later. Excuse me. So there are two lobes to the pituitary that are regulated by the hypothalamus. Remember I said in the last unit when we talked about the nervous system and the structure of the brain, that the hypothalamus is kind of like the nervous system control center for the endocrine system, because the nervous system, of course, is going to be like kind of the monitor over all of the processes that are occurring in the body. And hormones are the messengers that are going to change how your body responds to both the external and internal environment. So it's really important that there is a close connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. One of them, of course, being monitoring and controlling your body, and the other one being the causes of change, or the cause of change that your body needs under different circumstances. And so that's the relationship between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus, as I said, links the nervous system to the endocrine system. Now, you have neurosecretory cells. So neuro meaning nervous system, and secretory meaning they secrete. Secrete just means, let me get the proper definition from it, hold on. I always describe secreting as making and releasing. Secrete meaning, just want to make sure that I am accurate. Right, so it means to produce and discharge, so I'm correct. To make and release, that's what secrete means. Make and release. So the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus that are going to make hormones, these cells make hormones that are either going to be stored in the pituitary gland, or they're going to regulate the activities of the pituitary. So you can think of, it's kind of like, have you ever heard of like a puppet and a puppet master? So you've got your puppet with the strings, right? Strings hang from there. And then you've got your puppet master who, I can't draw a hand, but imagine there's, let's see, a thumb, 1, 2, 3, 4, magical skills. Hold on a second. Oh, I almost had it. Okay. Oh, Bluetooth. Oh, shoot. Okay. Anyway, so you have, I'm sure you can picture in your head a puppeteer, a person that's like controlling a puppet. But for the endocrine system, you have kind of like a person who's controlling the person who controls the puppet. So in this example, the endocrine glands are the puppet. The pituitary is the puppeteer or the puppet master controlling the puppet. And then the hypothalamus is the person controlling the puppet master controlling the puppets. So there's like a three-tiered level of control. The hypothalamus controls the pituitary controls the endocrine glands. Okay. And this is why I say it can start to get confusing, which is why I want to make sure that we take this section nice and slow, make sure that we all understand, because there's going to be a whole big bunch of hormones to learn as well, and like what their target cell is, what the action is. A lot of hormones are called antagonistic, meaning you've got one hormone that like kind of does one thing and another hormone that does the opposite. Insulin and glucagon are a great example of that, but we'll get to that in time. So the hypothalamus combined with the pituitary are the primary regulators of the endocrine system. Like I said, the pituitary is divided into two lobes, kind of like when I talked about the lungs. One lung has 3 lobes or section, and the other lung has 2. Just 2 parts of the same organ, the same gland. All right. So we're going to start with the posterior pituitary. That is the pituitary, before I say that, the pituitary lobe that has the neurosecretory cells that extend from the hypothalamus all the way down into the posterior pituitary. But the posterior pituitary makes 2 amino acid-based hormones that are made by these neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus. Okay, so let me go back to that. Oop, that was a slide. Okay, so there are 2 hormones that are made by the hypothalamus that come down through the neurons, and they're stored in the posterior pituitary. Okay, make sure we understand how that works. Okay, they're amino acid-based hormones, which means they're going to need a second messenger system. So the neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus make these hormones. They travel down the axon of the neuron to the posterior pituitary. There, they are stored for eventual release into the blood. And you might say, well, when are they released? It depends on the situation, okay? It depends on the hormone and the environment. So the first hormone that is made by the hypothalamus that is stored in the posterior pituitary is called oxytocin. This is also called the, what do they call it? The hugging hormone. So the action of oxytocin is that it stimulates the contraction of the uterus during childbirth, and it stimulates the flow of milk from mammary glands during nursing. Nursing is breastfeeding after the baby is born. Oxytocin. Yeah. Oh, the cuddle hormone. That's it. The cuddle hormone. Okay. So this is the hormone that is released. Well, the reason why they call it the cuddle hormone, because the levels of oxytocin rise when we hug, touch, or sit close to someone else. Oxytocin is associated with happiness and less stress. I'm just reading from an article called Healthline, or a website called healthline.com. It says, what are the benefits of hugging? I'm going to copy and send that to the line group just so you can read it yourself, since we're talking about hormones. The cuddle hormone, that's it. There is a strong link between the mother-baby bonding because of the release of oxytocin during nursing or breastfeeding. Okay, so again, this is the phonetic pronunciation, so it's oxytocin. Okay, oxytocin. The other hormone that is produced by the hypothalamus that travels down the axons and gets stored in the posterior pituitary is called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Just remembering the acronym or the abbreviation is okay. All right. I just want to try to look up diuretic. Oops. Diuretic, causing an increased passing of urine. Okay, I thought so. Just wanted to make sure. So a diuretic means it makes you pee more. So antidiuretic means it makes the amount of urine production less. But the effect of ADH is that it helps to regulate, the concentration of solutes in the blood by controlling the amount of water excreted by the kidneys. And of course, the kidneys are the organ that produce urine. So that's where the name antidiuretic comes from. Sorry, my ring just fell apart. Okay, no problem. So those are the two hormones that are made by the hypothalamus, but that travel from the hypothalamus down those neurons to the posterior pituitary and get stored there until it's needed. So when the concentration of solutes in the blood increases, the hypothalamus signals the posterior pituitary to secrete ADH. ADH causes the tubules in the kidneys to reabsorb water into the blood. That means that the kidneys are going to produce urine with a high solute concentration. Okay, so let me just go back and repeat that. I want to associate that the action with the meaning of the word antidiuretic. So diuretic means more urine, and anti, of course, means not. So that means we're going to decrease the amount of urine produced. So why would we want to decrease the amount of urine produced? It's not really decreasing the amount of urine as much as it is the water that is, I mean, I guess that would be urine, because it would, less water means less urine. But so that the situation or the instance or the situation, yes, I already said situation, the conditions, that's the word I'm looking for. The conditions under which you would want to produce less urine is, like I said before, when the concentration of solutes in the blood increases, okay? So you want to decrease the amount of solutes in the blood, which means you need to produce more concentrated urine. So ADH is going to be released by the posterior pituitary, because remember, your brain is monitoring the all of the internal conditions going on in your body, all the internal environment. So when the brain detects that the concentration of solutes is too high, the hypothalamus tells the posterior pituitary to release ADH. Okay, ADH targets the kidneys, and ADH tells the kidneys to reabsorb more water so that you're producing a more concentrated urine. The hypothalamic receptors, or the receptors in the hypothalamus, are going to detect the decrease in solutes in the blood. And so then it will tell the posterior pituitary to stop releasing ADH. So then the kidneys are like, okay, I don't have to absorb water again. Okay, is very much this, there's what's called a feedback mechanism, which I'll talk about at the end of the chapter, whether it's a positive or negative feedback. But basically, feedback just means if you're monitoring the situation and you get the response that, like, the changes that you said to make, the changes are happening, and then you can basically turn it off. I want you to think of the entire endocrine system as being very similar to your aircon system, okay? So you use your remote to tell your aircon what temperature you want the room. So let's say you set it at 25, and let's say your room is 30. So if your room is 30 degrees and you tell it that you want it to be 25 degrees, it's going to kick the compressor, which is the unit outside. The compressor is going to be turned on, and so cold air is going to blow out until you get to 25 degrees. Once the sensor in the unit, because there's a temperature sensor in the unit, that would be equivalent to your brain. Once the sensor senses that the temperature of the room is 25, then it's going to tell the compressor to turn off. That's when you hear the fan turn off outside, because you've already reached the desired temperature. So the compressor is like the hormones, and the temperature sensor inside your air con is like your brain. So it's this constant feedback, right? The temperature sensor has to understand, I mean, not, it doesn't actually understand because there's no brain, but it detects the temperature of the room, and then it will send an electric signal to the compressor whether or not to turn on or off, depending on what the temperature is. It's the same thing that your nervous system and endocrine system do to keep the homeostasis, to keep homeostasis in your body. Okay, now on to the anterior pituitary. Now, the anterior pituitary is going to be more complicated. The posterior pituitary is the easiest thing to understand, because the posterior pituitary itself doesn't make any hormones. It just stores the hormones, the two hormones from the hypothalamus. But it gets a lot more complicated when you talk about the anterior pituitary. The neurosecretory cells, let me go back to the original diagram. So you have two sets of neurosecretory cells, which you can see here. The ones in the hypothalamus that go down to the pituitary, they are all the way elongated and connected, 100% physically going all the way through from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary, you see that they stop at the border of the anterior pituitary. So they don't extend all the way down into it, which means that the hypothalamus is going to make hormones that are going to travel to the anterior pituitary to tell the anterior pituitary which hormones to release. A lot of these hormones that the anterior pituitary are going to release are going to be signals for all of your other glands. Maybe it's the thyroid, maybe it's the adrenal gland, adrenal, maybe it's your pineal, Bluetooth. I'm even connected, like with a wire and everything. Shoot. So we've got the thyroid, just as some examples, adrenal and pineal are just three examples of endocrine glands that have their own hormones that do have their own action. So this is what I mean, the puppet master of the puppet master of the puppet. You've got these neurons in the hypothalamus, which are going to release a hormone to tell the anterior pituitary to release a hormone to tell one of these glands to do something, okay? So that's why I said it's gonna get complicated. All right, so the neurosecretory cells make and secrete releasing hormones, which stimulate the endocrine cells in the anterior pituitary to make and secrete hormones. So you're going to see the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus. They're going to release releasing hormones or release inhibiting hormones. This is basically the on-off switch to the anterior pituitary. But remember, the anterior pituitary is releasing hormones that we're going to tell other endocrine glands which hormones to release. That's why I said the endocrine system can be complicated. So it only really helps to go through examples. So again, here's a different point of view. This is your pituitary gland. You see the posterior at the back, anterior at the front. You can see the actual neurons going all the way through. Those are like those kind of little beady string looking things. And then you've got, of course, in the blue, that is your blood vessels. So your hypothalamus is here. You're going to have, like I said, releasing hormones and release inhibiting hormones, the on switch and the off switch. These are made in response to stimuli processed by the nervous system, because of course, the entire monitoring system of your body is the nervous system. For every anterior pituitary hormone, there is at least one releasing hormone and one release inhibiting hormone, because it makes sense. You can't control light without an on and off switch. And every single light in your house has its own on-off switch, right? So it's the same thing here. Try to come up with analogies to hopefully make it easier, hoping it's not making it more complicated. Excuse me. So here you see a specialized system of blood vessels that connects the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. You do not see that on the posterior pituitary because it's not connected by blood vessels, it's connected by neurons. Okay, that's the difference. Some anterior pituitary hormones are regulated through releasing and release inhibiting hormones. It's even hard for me to say. Releasing and release inhibiting hormones, the on, off, or start, stop switches. First, I'm going to talk about anterior pituitary hormones that aren't associated with other endocrine glands. Okay, so they're going to have a direct effect straight from the anterior pituitary to the body. First, you have growth hormone, or GH. This controls skeletal and muscular growth. Seems pretty straightforward. Growth occurs from bone and muscle. Okay, you don't grow if your skeleton and your muscles don't grow. So that's from the hypothalamus. You will have GH releasing hormone, and that's from the hypothalamus, and that will tell the anterior pituitary to release GH, and guess what? You grow. Okay, I'll try to come up with some flow charts to make it easier to understand how that works. When you reach around 18, 19, somewhere around that, you don't need that anymore. So then you'll have GH release inhibiting hormone, again from the hypothalamus, that will go to the AP, anterior pituitary, and it will stop releasing growth hormone. The second hormone that has a direct effect from the AP is called prolactin, abbreviated PRL. This stimulates and sustains the production of breast milk during lactation. Now, when a female is pregnant, the mammary glands in the breast start to produce milk, so the breasts get bigger. This is in preparation for birth. When the baby is born, then nursing or breastfeeding will occur after that. It's also possible to not feed the baby directly from the breast, but to pump the breast milk out and then feed the baby with a bottle. There's different opinions, I guess, on that. And you guys, when you're old enough to want to have kids, or if you do want to have kids, you can read which approach you want to have better. Some people feed formula to the babies, which is like a powder that you buy in the store. And then I believe you mix it with milk. I don't have kids, so I have no idea, but I believe you mix it with milk or water. I think it's with water. But from what I've read, a lot of doctors recommend breast milk because the breast milk also contains antibodies. And so by feeding the baby breast milk, you're kind of priming the baby's immune system with antibodies that they don't have yet. So it's kind of like leveling up before you're exposed to like the bad guys being pathogens. Okay. Prolactin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus stimulates prolactin production and secretion from the anterior pituitary. So prolactin releasing hormone is from the hypothalamus, and then prolactin production and secretion is going to be from the anterior pituitary. Then you have prolactin release inhibiting hormone, which will stop prolactin secretion from the AP. The releasing hormones also regulate the production and secretion of other hormones in the anterior pituitary that stimulate other endocrine glands. Okay, and I'm not going to get into that. Yeah, I'm not going to get into that yet because I think there's plenty to digest from today. We've got 7 minutes left anyway. Let me just stop recording.